Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today is our second day on Unit 5.3, Industrial Revolution Begins. So let us continue. So we'll start class with looking at a couple of images and, not as a sourcing activity, but, just as kind of to rebuild some of these skills from the fall after we've had a break. Let's just kind of go down to breaking down these images and kind of just doing an exploration of the image itself and what are you seeing here. So when you see this image, right, what are you seeing? All right, so, the easiest way to do this is just make some observations. All right, so look at the image, what are you seeing, and then why are you seeing it, and what is that being used for, and, right, run through your steps and try to explore, the image itself and what you're supposed to be extracting from it. So go ahead and take a moment and do that, and we'll come back. All right, welcome back. So, when we do this discussion in class, we usually start off by saying you're seeing air pollution. So what are you seeing the air pollution from? So you're seeing the air pollution from the extraction from the burning of coal. Right, so the Industrial Revolution is not just a textile revolution; it's also a fossil fuel revolution. Right, so which fossil fuel is the one that initiates this revolution? Coal. Right, so you're seeing the burning of coal. So we're seeing coals being burnt. Well, why are we seeing coals being burnt? Right, so take it to the next step. Coals being burnt in order to boil water in order to generate energy. So it's so we've seen the steam engines, right, being applied. Well, what is that energy being used for, right, to power the machines? So what kind of machines? Your power looms, your water frames, once they mechanize. So this is so the end result here is that this is being used to generate power in order to power the machines in order to make the textiles. Right, so that's what you should be seeing here. Other things you might want to think about is like what source of energy is being replaced by coal, right? So human energy, manpower is what is being replaced. So individuals would have run those looms before, or maybe a water wheel is being replaced, right, by coal, right? So understand what is being replaced and what this is being used for. All right, so next image. It's the same thing. Go ahead and explore it is what you're seeing, and then we'll come back. All right, so welcome back. And what are you seeing here? Once again, you're seeing coal being burnt. So, a steamboat is generally the first thing that people say when they see this. So what source of energy is being replaced by coal here? So, students will very quickly, point out the fact that wind power is the source of energy that's being replaced, or human power, manpower is being replaced by this. So why would you do this? So the consistent speed that gets, that enables you, that you're enabled to have by using coal. You can also control your routes, right? Your routes are not dependent upon wind. So, I guess the easiest thing to say is can you travel from New York City to London faster on a large steamboat or with a large sailboat? The answer is probably faster on a sailboat. However, can you travel from London to New York faster on a steam or a sailboat? And the answer is probably going to be a steamboat because your route is not determined, right, by steamboat. So you can use the shortest possible route, right? So you're not dependent on the wind, etc., etc. Right. So that's one angle you can look at this. The other one is we also have been talking about the Industrial Revolution as something that originates in England. Well, we're seeing an image here from the United States in the application of technology here. So we're seeing the spread of the Industrial Revolution in this image as well. All right, next image. All right, so same thing. Go ahead and make your descriptions and then come back. All right, so if you've done your descriptions, the obvious thing is you're seeing women. So when we explore this in class, we'll kind of point out where the men are, why, what the role of men are in this kind of situation. What examples are we seeing of industrialization in here? So these are belts, right? These belts are then probably connected back to a steam engine somewhere. And these are being used to power the individual machines in which are being used to make the textiles. Right. So, but yeah, so you can make all kinds of observations here about, whether the women have nice working conditions or not. If there's sufficient lighting. One of the angles I'd like to explore with this is kind of a recap from something that we discussed in topic 5.1 is how does this image measure up with the cult of domesticity? So the cult of domesticity is a concept in which rises to prominence in places like England, in the middle and the end of the 1800s. And this image is obviously, one that is, from that genre, or sorry, from that era. So how does this image match up with cult of domesticity? And the answer that we usually get in class is, usually that this doesn't really match up very well because the cult of domesticity has an understanding that women should be at home. Whether you want to use the straight up Napoleon purpose of what women are in order to generate babies for the state, or more kind of British model of women are there to run the homes. Either way, they should not necessarily be in factories. So what does that tell us? This tells us that ideas like the cult of domesticity applies to upper class and upper middle class women, but not all women within a society, right? There's limitations. Lower class women have to work in order to feed their families, pay bills, etc., etc. All right, so that's kind of the more traditional angle of saying that this doesn't, the kids usually come up with is that it doesn't. Every once in a while, I do have a student who, kind of makes a pretty astute observation that this is compatible with the cult of domesticity in that you have men watching over women. However, in order to really make that work, you'd really have to explain how that would be. So, so in class, I'll usually take a minute if a student does come up with this to kind of look at some of the implications of urbanization. Of course, the implications of urbanization, is, you do have a breakdown of a traditional family. You do have a lot of unwanted pregnancies and girls going into foundry houses and, you might know as orphanages. So what happens when those girls reach, 13, 14 years of age? One of the ways in which industrial societies dealt with those girls is, they would put them into factory housing and where they would be supervised in their off hours, and then they would be supervised in, in their work settings as well. So that way their virtue could be protected. In that way, you could say that this is an image that matches up with a cult of domesticity. Kind of a different angle, a different way of looking at this thing. All right, next image. So go ahead and take a minute and explore this image, and we'll come back. All right, so once again, we're seeing our connection to, our connection to our energy source, our power source here. All right, so the first thing that students will generally shout out there is child labor, right? That might be the first thing you wrote down, child labor. So when I look at this image in class, I usually look at it from two different angles. I'll usually start from why would the child want to go to work? And then after we explore that for a few minutes, then why would a factory owner want to employ a child? So let's just kind of run through these really quick. Why would a child want to work there? One can once again play into social class with this, like we did with the previous image. This is probably not an upper class or upper middle class family. These are, working classes, lower classes, or, orphans, or, children who are spending their days on the streets. So that's kind of one way of looking at it, that they're doing that out of necessity in order to feed themselves, or they're being forced by their family members to go and generate additional revenue for the family. So that's kind of an easy, kind of the obvious choice for that. All right. So why would a factory owner choose to hire a child? And right, there's all kinds of obvious or simple answers to this. You don't have to pay them as much. You can make them perform tasks in which would, a lot of adults could not do physically, or would not want to do. You don't have to be as concerned about their welfare. There's, because of the realities of unwanted pregnancies, at this time in the industrial cities, if the child is hurt or killed or, can't be persuaded to work in a sufficient manner, they're very easily replaceable. And of course, if they are, children who are living on the street, if something does happen to them, there's very little repercussions that come out of this. And when we talk about these kinds of things in class, I'll often mention, when do we start to see the beginnings of child laws and child labor laws and the such? And one of the very early examples of this would be the Sadler Committee and the Sadler Reports. So the British Parliament in 1832 did establish a commission to explore, factory labor and women, children especially. In the Sadler Reports, that's Sadler, right? So in the Sadler Reports, you have all kinds of examples of testimony, of people who had, seen children killed, beaten, or family members, right, when they were children, killed or beaten in the workplace, and it is pretty difficult to read through and process all of all of that stuff. Just it's such a foreign thing living in the West. That being said, you could very, very easily go to Google and find images exactly like this of children very similar ages working in factories today. So when we talk about child labor restrictions and laws, it's a by country kind of topic. So yes, you're going to start to see child labor laws coming up in the 1830s and a strengthening of them in the late 1840s and 1850s in places like England. One of the very first child labor laws are laws like children are not allowed to work underground in the coal mines until they reach the age of 11. That's kind of a very typical kind of law. Also, requiring factory owners to provide some essential schooling or education for these children as well. So, maybe an hour or 2 hours a day of, of some kind of education. Teach them how to read, teach them how to write. So, all right, moving on. In the last image, and, in very, kind of wrap this one up very quickly, we often just I'll ask students, like, where do you think this image is from? They'll generally say Asia, right? And then I'll ask them more specifically, and then they'll usually say China, and then I'll say no, guess again, and then they'll say Japan. All right, so this is this is an image from Japan, from the Meiji era, and we'll often kind of just look for similarities from the other image that we did. So feel free to do that, and we're just going to move on. All right. Okay, so what do we see here with the Industrial Revolution as we saw in these images? Obviously, the last images were from Japan. We also see an image from the United States here. So we know the Industrial Revolution spreads, right? So it spreads out of England, and initially to the United States. So Francis Cabot Lowell, is generally credited with bringing the Industrial Revolution to the United States. So given my students live in the Southeast, they're probably not familiar with the city of Lowell, right? So on the Merrimack River in Massachusetts. And so about 20 miles or so, give or take, west of Boston, you have the city of Lowell, right? So kind of ground zero for the Industrial Revolution in the United States. So how would we kind of categorize the origins of the Industrial Revolution in the United States? Industrial Revolution in the United States was initiated by entrepreneurs or middle-class merchants, right? That would be a good way to kind of category of analysis the origins of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. In the case of Belgium, right, kind of reading through that, very similar, right? Very, very similar. So, so middle-class entrepreneurs, merchants initiated the Industrial Revolution in Belgium as well. In this case here, right? There you go. We have a former Englishman. All right. In the case of France, right? And so when we talk about France, we do so really quickly in class. And of course, France has all these preconditions that England had in order for the Industrial Revolution to happen there. So, the obvious thing is, why doesn't it begin earlier in France? So students will very quickly, come up with the French Revolution is taking place. The Napoleonic Wars are taking place, right? After the Congress of Vienna in 1815, the Bourbons are restored back to the monarchy, and they kind of get that very conservative period of time. So, and then of course in the 1830s, or in 1830, there's another revolution. So this is the revolution that most students who are in theater know about, because this is the Les Miserables revolution. The art lovers all are familiar with the Delacroix painting, Liberty and its People, the woman holding the tricolor flag, standing on the barricades. That's the 1830 revolution, and that's going to usher in the Orleans monarchy, and this is going to be a government which initiates the industrial process. So a government that supports industrialization, promotes it. Right. Germany, right? Germany. We see industrialization beginning there in the 1840s. There is technically no such thing as Germany in the 1840s, though, right? So this is, what would have been known as the land of the Holy Roman Empire, but at this point, it's really just a series of, princedoms and duchies and, small states, hundreds of small states. But by the late 1840s, you're going to start to see a consolidation of those states really emanating out of Berlin, right, and spreading. And in the 1850s and 60s, you're going to see that consolidation take place, or that unification take place. So 1871, right, which is labeled right here, 1871 is what we generally consider to be the birth of Germany, or the creation of the German state. But it's simply the end of the consolidation process. Really, is all that 1871 is. So that being said, industrialization was well underway, right, before that happens. And by the time we get to 1871, Germany is the clear leader of the Industrial Revolution at that point. England has been surpassed. And really, when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, there's that first stage of the Industrial Revolution, which is the textile part. But the second stage, which we generally look at Germany as being the one who ushers this one, is that chemical revolution, the steel revolution. So many of the companies that are, that we kind of, associate with this, some of them still are around today, like the Bayer Corporation, right? And you probably know them from Bayer aspirin. But also Germany becomes the leader in pesticides and, the entire chemical industry in general. Germany will become the leader in. But also things like automobiles, right? The combustion engine is invented in Germany. So you're probably familiar with the names like Rudolf Diesel or Benz or Maybach, and we'll talk about them on a later date. So Germany invents the automobile. I always have to tell my students that Henry Ford does not invent the automobile. He simply made it affordable. So we'll talk about that later as well. All right, so Germany, major player. All right, Japan, right? So Japan, I guess Germany, by the way, is more of an entrepreneurial, middle-class initiated process. Japan is a really good example of a government-initiated, initiating the process of industrialization. All right. So Japan, 1870s, and of course, this is a process that has a story in and of itself. But when does that process really begin? 1868 if you're looking for a hard year, 1868 is the year. Right. This is the beginning of the Meiji period, of the Meiji Emperor will oversee this, industrialization. So yes, before 1868, Tokugawa shogunate, and then a series of events force the Tokugawa shogunate to open up to the world, and then this is going to result in the Tokugawa shogunate being overthrown in 68. So in 1868, this begins that Meiji period. All right, so very important word. Make sure you know that word, Meiji. All right, so in the 1890s, we see Russia. kind of joining in. And so once again, this is another government-initiated industrial revolution. In this case here, Sergei Witt, it becomes we have a single finance minister who we can kind of associate with a lot of this. So, Japan and Russia are both lacking some of these preconditions for industrialization. So the government will initiate the process and they will help overcome. So one of the big issues that Russia was lacking was financing. So, the French and the British investors will be invited in to invest in the factories, and have a pretty active role. The Japanese model is quite different, though. The Japanese model does not invite in foreign money, or definitely not foreigners to run the factories. They will bring in foreign contractors, right? People with expertise to come and teach and then get sent home. And they will definitely send their own people all over the world to learn and then bring that knowledge back, right? So they'll come home with that human capital. So Japan will tightly control that industrial process, whereas Russia is a little more loose with foreign influence. So kind of similarities, right, in that they're both government-initiated, differences in the levels of control in which they have over this. All right, so let's do a little quick review here. All right, so this will be a multiple choice review. Which of the following most directly explains the importance of improved agricultural productivity to the industrialization of economic production in Western Europe in the period? All right, so your possible answers. Go ahead and read through those. Go ahead and pause it and read through those, and I'll come back in a second. All right, so welcome back. Hopefully you guessed this as the correct answer. And if you don't understand why that's the correct answer, there's a brief explanation down at the bottom. Feel free to pause and read. All right, next question. The industrialization of Great Britain's economy in the mid-18th and early 19th centuries, and I'm still in the habit of when I read stuff like that, I'll go back and say that means the mid-1700s and the early 1800s. I don't know why I always reinforce that, but I always feel like I have to reinforce that. So the industrialization of Great Britain's economies in the mid-18th and early 19th centuries is most directly explained by which of the following? So go ahead and read through and unpause when you think you know the answer. All right, so welcome back, and hopefully you guessed that is the correct answer. And if you don't understand why it's the correct answer, here's an explanation. All right, so we're typically in class today by asking you to write a sentence, a single sentence, or you want to write a couple, you're more than welcome to write a couple. So, but respond to the prompt with a claim, right, with an assertion. So the prompt is this. In the period of 1750 to 1900, the economies of numerous states in Europe, North America, and Asia underwent industrialization. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which environmental factors played a role in the process of industrialization when it was brought to Asia. All right, when it was brought to Asia. Okay, so this being the case, remember when we talk about claim development, we need to make sure that we incorporate two separate things into our claims, that we have a clear category of analysis that we're working with, and we have skill application. So, and make sure you are using one side of one skill in each claim. So that means effect or cause, right? And simply saying the skill word does not mean skill application, right? So you can't just say, or here's like a word bank of, I'm giving you some options because we're kind of reviewing this and restarting up again. Right, so here's an example of some categories of analysis you might be able to use. You can't just say one effect was improved agricultural productivity. It just doesn't make any sense. That is no skill application. So you need to apply the skill. You can't just say the word. All right, but here's a good listing of possible categories of analysis, and I'm also going to give you a couple of documents that you can use to help come up with your sentence. So I'm going to give you some examples of the process of industrialization in Asia. So let's start with this one. All right, so what do we have here? We have our source, and I always kind of like to make sure you are reading your source tag. And so when I read this one in class, I just kind of go through how I read documents, just as a reminder to you, because I haven't, you've been doing this on your own for a little while, and we're coming back and doing this again. So Qing Dynasty officials and advocate of domestic reform, memorandum, Qing Dynasty, 1867. All right, so we are 1 year before the Meiji Restoration takes place, and there's also a whole lot of contextual things that we just haven't covered in this class yet. So I'm going to keep this pretty basic and do a simple little thing. One is, first off, if you are a Qing Dynasty official, what does that mean? And it usually means that you're either a eunuch or something else. So I'll generally ask students to try to figure out what that something else is. Usually they're pretty quick to come up with Confucian, right? Confucian bureaucrat. How do you become a Confucian, Confucian advisor to the government? Performance on the civil service examination system, yada, yada. All right, so with that in mind, right, we kind of read through this document. So what shall we do about telegraphs and roads? All right, so this is a document about bringing industrial technology to China. So go ahead and read this, and and then I'll discuss it after a minute. So go. All right, so welcome back. What I'll often kind of start with this is there any evidence in this document of Confucian influence? Generally, students will be very quick to point out, yes, they'll point out filial piety, as a concept, or ancestor veneration, by talking about their graves. I guess it's they remember when we talked about that when we did the Qingming scroll, back with topic 1.1, I believe, right? All right, so there's that, and then I'll often say, is this a document, or I'll ask, is this a document against industrialization? Right? And obviously this is not. This is not an anti-industrial technology document, but they are against something, right? And generally students are pretty quick, and hopefully as you read this at home, you're pretty quick to, to figure out that it's the foreign influence or the foreign control that they're ultimately concerned about. So if you pick that out of there, good job. All right, let's read a second, and this will be our last document. So this is an Ottoman government report concerning the proposal to build a railway from Damascus to Mecca in 1893. And when I look at this in class, I'll give them a very quick little bit of contextualization about this, just because it has not been part of the homework yet. So to start off, in 1882, England will, take over control of Egypt. So 11 years before this document is created, right, England will take over control of Egypt, and with it the Suez Canal. And the justification for taking over Egypt and the Suez Canal was because when the Egyptians built the Suez Canal, they did not have the funding to do so. So they financed that project through French and British sources. So the British and the French loaned them the money. Throughout, there is a series of issues that take place for a variety of reasons, in which we'll discuss in class. But the Egyptians were unable to pay, that loan back. Defaulting on their loans, the British will then use that as a context to take over Egypt. All right, so that being the case, let's kind of start this, and then I'll have you read through it. Unless an alternative way, other than the Suez Canal, controlled by the British, is found to connect the holy cities of Mecca and Medina to the rest of the empire, the Red Sea coast of Arabia might fall prey to the evils of those who strive to overthrow the very foundation of the caliphate. All right, so go ahead and read through this, and then we'll come back real quick. All right, welcome back. And so, so once again, I'll, I ask students, is this a document for or against industrial technology? The answer is obvious. Should be obvious. They're not against industrial technology at all. This is, proposing the building of a railway. So what are they against? What are the concerns that they have here? Right, and we should get similar answers to this. Right, it's the foreign funding. It's the foreign, the foreign influence. And based on that contextual information I just gave you about Egypt, you should be very clear and easy to understand why the Ottomans would be concerned about allowing the British or any foreigner to finance these projects. This is one of the great dangers of taking loans from foreign countries, right? Is, there's these concepts of, debt traps, and what happens when you can't afford to pay your debts back to that foreign entity. So with that in mind, right? These are our documents. We're gonna write a claim on this. Now, I did put into Google Classroom, this right here, which so you have access to these prompts if you wanna look at them. And there's also a Google document if you're watching this from home that you can write your sentence right here, and then you can submit it. You can submit it via Classroom. So there you go. All right, and that is it for today. So I'm not going to let's just kind of reread this. The Industrial Revolution spread from Britain to the rest of Europe, the United States, later spread to places like Japan and Russia. As it spread, the global share of manufacturing shifted. The Industrial Revolution depends on new technologies, steam engine, use of coal, new sources of energy. It is an energy revolution. Right? It is definitely an energy revolution, replacing wind and replacing manpower. Governments use a variety of strategies, from business-friendly policies to little regulation as a way to direct control in order to facilitate industrial process. So we kind of talked about this just a little bit, and that both government in Russia and Japan both initiated both initiated the Industrial Revolution to come to their countries respectively, but they don't always have to employ the same strategies, right? So just make sure you're understanding that as you're going through your homeworks. All right, that is it for today. Sapriati.